In 2010, we found a dog, skinny and starving, by the side of the road in Calabria, southern Italy. He had been dumped in a lay-by on a remote mountain road near a small village and left to fend for himself. We rescued him and called him Dino. Our Italian friends called him Fortunato, which means lucky in Italian because so many stray dogs in southern Italy never find a home. So he became Dino Fortunato, and he is the inspiration for this film. During our mission to rescue Dino, we began to find out more about the reality for unwanted dogs behind the sun-drenched vistas of Bella Italia. Every country in the world has homeless dogs and an army of unsung heroes fighting for them. Through this film, it is our goal to shine a light into the world of stray dogs. And we start where it all began, in Italy. After our conversation with Luca Spennacchio, we are heading south. Our next stop is Castelvolturno, a small town outside of Naples. This dog at a service station is a sign that we are entering the south, where there are more free-roaming dogs. There are many differences between the north and south of Italy. One of those differences is that in the south there is a greater cultural acceptance of dogs living loose on the streets. We have learned that the dog shelters throughout Italy, like so many around the world, are all full. But unlike many other countries, Italy has been no-kill since 1991. We are discovering that this ban on euthanasia led to an explosion in the number of unwanted dogs being held in shelters around the country. And to make matters worse, the 1991 law stipulated that the public shelters would be paid per dog per day. This created a warped financial incentive and literally turned stray dogs into currency. In other words, the more dogs a public shelter holds, the more money they receive from the government, with little to no oversight on how that money is spent or how the dogs are cared for. We are going to talk to Dorothea Fritz, a German vet who has been fighting for stray dogs in southern Italy for 36 years. Dorothea runs a non-profit vet clinic called Lega Pro Animale in the countryside outside of Naples. She told us that after living on the premises for 30 years, she recently bought a house in nearby Castelvolturno and claimed with a smile that she is retired.
When did you make the change? Last year, did you say?
I'm retired. I'm old.
Oh, you could have fooled us. You don't seem very retired.
You only have to spend a few minutes with Dorothea to figure out that she is anything but retired. She is incredibly dedicated to her clinic and her work. After nearly 4 decades of battling this problem, Dorothea has her sights set on solutions that work. But it wasn't always that way.
What I'm doing here, I came here to lay in the sun on the beach.
Dorothea came to Naples from Germany in 1982 as a young vet looking for a job and life in the sun. Instead, she found herself in the middle of an animal welfare problem.
We don't have stray dogs and we don't have spraying dogs in Germany. I didn't have any idea about a problem, a stray problem. I didn't even know what it was. I was only wondering why these dogs are on the street without an owner.
Soon after arriving in Italy in 1982, Dorothea got a job as an assistant vet in a clinic in downtown Naples.
Every day somebody came, was an injured animal, and then there was an English lady. She took me to a big shelter with 650 really sick dogs. And when I went inside, so I got the shock of my life.
Dorothea started volunteering at the shelter, and with that, her dream of an easy life in the sun ended, and her mission to help dogs in southern Italy began.
So in the first weeks we only cleaned and treated the dogs, and I would say about 90% were sick. So even if healthy dogs came in without a month, 2 months, they had symptoms, because dogs in a shelter are under stress, the immune system is not working, and in shelters animals are always under stress. And no matter how big and nice the shelter is, that's a prison. You know, it's the prison with smaller or bigger cages, but it's a prison.
Dorothea used her own money to buy medication and started treating the sick dogs at the shelter. She challenged those in charge of the facility and got her first taste of what would become a lifelong fight with the authorities to make life better for stray dogs in the south.
And then you got kicked out of that shelter?
We got kicked out of the shelter because I was trying to change something. So we were so angry, we were so mad, and we decided we remain here and we will close this place.
It would have been a much easier choice to move on and work elsewhere, but Dorothea is obviously not a fan of easy choices. Staying in the Naples area with the goal of closing down this public shelter as a young vet in 1982 was not a choice for the faint-hearted.
So no internet. I was writing on my typewriting machine. I was writing letters to shelters in Munich. I wrote to the World Society for Protection of Animals, to the RSPC in England, to the German big organization we are working with now, together with them. All kind of big organizations. I found the addresses in the telephone book, you know, things like this. And nobody answered, besides the World Society for Protection of Animals answered saying they cannot do anything in another country. Why they are called World Society for Protection of Animals? Because they don't have any, I understand it today, but they don't have any possibility for enforcement in another country. But they could write a letter to the embassy or something like this, you know, so they didn't do anything. And then in Germany they offered help. They said they can't do anything on the legal base in Italy because they weren't even in the European Union at this time, but they can help me to create an alternative.
Dorothea also gained the support of AISPA, the Anglo-Italian Society for the Protection of Animals, a charity based in London. They had donated equipment to the shelter Dorothea was trying to close down. They told her to take the equipment and supported her in her mission to set up an alternative facility.
AISPA was donating to the shelter. They allowed me to take it with me, so the shelter denounced me that I have stolen this equipment. It was terrible. And then I started in this, we found an old farmhouse, was really old and breaking down. And we started there to have a little surgery, you know, and we 30 of the dogs we liked best from this shelter we took out and stole and took them over there. And no money, you know, there was no money for us because nobody in the shelter, they said I went back to Germany. So I had some clients, but they told them that I'm not here anymore. I went back to Germany, and it took me quite a bit that people found out that I'm still working. So I did like house calls for €5 or something like this, you know. It's nearly the gas for the car went there. So we didn't have a lot of money. We had the butcher who gave us rests and meat pieces and things, and we cooked every day something. So what they gave us, so we had bread and pasta, and this English lady helped us still in this time, and she worked at the base, so she made lots of connections. And Americans came in and they donated food because it was very cheap. There was food, American dog food in the PX, and it was very cheap, so they came and donated us dog food.
As word got around that Dorothea had rescued dogs from the local shelter and set up a clinic at the rundown farmhouse, animals were regularly dumped at her gate, and she quickly became overwhelmed.
We had cases of puppies and kittens every day outside the gate. And one day there were 62 of them in one day. Cases and boxes and things with newborn or 4 weeks old or 6 week old puppies and kittens. You can't keep them all, they're dying.
During this time, Dorothea was juggling her work with the animals with fundraising.
I was typewriting my newsletters and photocopying them somewhere in a shop and writing the addresses by hand on the envelopes. We started out with 10 a week, and then it was 100 a week, and I couldn't do it weekly anymore. I can't imagine anymore what I was sometimes until midnight in the office after work.
Dorothea quickly discovered that there was no culture of adoption in the Naples area in the 1980s. So as unwanted dogs started to accumulate at her clinic, she worked with her allies back home and began sending dogs to Germany, where the stray problem was and is almost non-existent.
So there was no rehoming here. And then when we had so many dogs, I started getting in contact with German shelters, and we started rehoming dogs in Germany, like 20 or 30 a year. And then I was attacked by the Italian big organizations that I sell the dogs in Germany with the vivisection. And there was a big thing going on, denouncements. I had court cases. I was in television. They told everybody on television that I would kill dogs in horrible ways, and I had like threatenings and death threats, and I was terrible. And
What
still
was that
there's some of the groups that still say I am doing this. So I stopped rehoming dogs in Germany because for 20 or 30 dogs bringing to a good home, what is it changing here? You know, so I stopped taking dogs in, and I stopped rehoming.
Just to clarify, Dorothea was falsely accused of selling dogs to Germany for animal experiments. She suffered a character assassination campaign, and she received death threats. So you might think that now would have been the time for her to leave, right? Wrong. In her crusade to make life better for unwanted dogs in southern Italy, Dorothea was running into some dark forces. But she is a trailblazer and a fighter. Instead of running away, as many of us would, she shifted her focus from trying to save unwanted dogs to preventing their births in the first place. From that moment on, Dorothea poured all of her resources into preventative measures, primarily spay and neuter.
And we used all our energy and money to make sure that there's not even if I get one dog more fixed, especially a male can get pregnant 300 female a year. Can you imagine? That's 3,000 puppies, you know? One male is responsible for 3,000 puppies a year.
And then she discovered something else.
I mean, you see all these dogs in the street, and I had the idea that eventually if you catch these dogs and spay neuter them, then when you reach the 70% level, then you have eventually resolved the problem. And then slowly, I found out that the dogs on the street are not stray dogs. You know, then we focused on the private dogs.
If you come from a part of the world where dogs do not typically run loose on the streets, you might assume that any loose dog is a so-called stray. Dorothea discovered that many dogs who appear to be strays are actually privately owned. In southern Italy, it is common for privately owned dogs to roam free during the day and return home at night. In some cases, privately owned dogs are abandoned and left to fend for themselves, like our Dino was in Calabria. Then there are the real strays who live in packs, usually away from humans, and who, quite often, are able to regulate themselves without human intervention. As it turned out, the real strays were not the problem.
I worked for the Navy bases in Taranto, and they're real stray dogs. You couldn't touch them. So when they have puppies, you can't touch them. And they don't survive. So they have maybe 8 puppies, and every time you come there is 7, 6, 5, maybe 1 is surviving. So the puppies you find in the street here, they are dumped by their owners, and they are well socialized, or the the cases we have outside the gate, you open, they are used to be touched by people, so they are from owners.
As if on cue, during our day of filming at Dorothea's clinic, a loose dog showed up at the gate.
Hanno abbandonato qua da
Cosa parte?
mo vediamo.
This is me, nearly tripping over my tripod as we head out to take a look. He is clearly used to humans, so we can safely assume he is not a real stray from one of the feral packs. That means he is either owned and free roaming, or worse, he was owned by somebody who dumped him. Eleonora is a long-time client of Dorothea's, and she tells us she thinks he's been dumped.
Si è avvicinato dove c'è un po' di movimento. Il 90% dei cani è da caccia quelli abbandonati.
Dorothea has gone to get her scanner to see if he has a microchip. Meanwhile, Eleonora tells us about the issue of hunting dogs in the area and how they are often dumped when they no longer serve a purpose.
Per carità, però adesso non è periodo di caccia, quindi qualcosa di strano c'è. Comunque non è anziano, cioè i denti
E non è neanche un cane randazzo, un cane...
No, è da poco che è successa questa cosa.
No chip. Dorothea phones the neighbouring farm to see if they know anything about him.
He wasn't here in the morning.
You think there's any chance that he belongs to somebody? Or
No chip.
no chip?
He's a hunting dog, so maybe somebody dumped him because he's not okay for hunting.
So what can you do now?
Hope that he's going home.
So you wouldn't take him and keep him
No,
here?
because we are not rehoming, so there's no way to.
Nothing to do.
If I take him in, everybody knows, and tomorrow there's more dogs, you know. So normally we leave him outside, and then people like she is coming, people who take care of animals, and then they are there, take them with them, you know. So that's what we are doing normally. So we don't feed them, because if you feed them here, they never would go away. And normally 2-3 days somebody is taking them, and we offer them to do spaying, neutering, nothing.
So if people thought that you were rehoming dogs, they would just bring them all, bring them all here.
It's written even on the gate that we are not taking in strays, but I don't think he was dumped here. He is completely wet, so he might have been dumped on a field.
When faced with the cutest ginger Springer Spaniel you've ever seen, it is easy to forget about all of Dorothea's extremely well thought out reasons for not taking in dogs.
You're a sweet boy. Where did you come from, little ginger nut?
This sweet dog represents one of the many tough dilemmas that Dorothea has been living with for nearly 4 decades. He is adorable and obviously needs a loving home, but taking him in would send a message to the local community that she will rescue any dog left at her gate, which she cannot afford to do. And it would take valuable resources away from her primary goal of spay and neutering. I immediately fall in love and name him Enrico. I give him Dorothea's last name, Fritz. I have been stoic about trying not to bring any dogs back with us. Is Enrico Fritz the one who will break my resolve, I wonder?
Ma come sei arrivato qua? Ti ha visto, dottoressa?
He is certainly going for the hard sell. Even Dorothea's groundskeeper is starting to fold. As if sniffing weakness in the ranks, Dorothea appears.
Alright, if I take this dog in, it cost me so much as the spaying of 8 female dogs. Tell me what I should do. if I spray 8 female dogs, we avoid hundreds and hundreds of other dogs being abandoned. Or shall I take this in?
The dilemma is heartbreaking, and Dorothea has spent her whole life struggling with it.
Then we have it in the shelter. And then I have to rehome it, and that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And besides the work, it costs me a lot of money. We have to microchip it, we have to vaccinate it, we have to fix it, we have to do everything. And the dog is here, and will finish in one of the pens eventually. And I think we should use our resources to make preventive measurements, because we are vets working here. So the rehoming can do anybody else, other organizations. So that's the dilemma. So what shall I do?
I don't know how you do it,
If you
Dorothy.
tell me take it in, I will do it, but then I can't do the spaying neutering anymore on a big scale.
No.
You know? And we have more dogs every day because it spreads the word. It's so difficult to rehome dogs in the area.
If she can't find him a home, Dorothea knows that he would end up in one of her cages. And as she sees it, taking a dog in and putting him in a cage is not saving that dog.
So this dog is not sick, it's not in danger, it's not a puppy which knows how to avoid a car. So
It is so hard to turn away an abandoned dog, and I admire Dorothea's strength. I honestly couldn't do it. If I lived here, I would end up with a shelter full of dogs and no money. And as Dorothea points out, if she were to do that, she would be finished.
I don't have the money to take care of these dogs, because then I have to cut down my preventive measurement work. And unfortunately, the money is not. The money is a limiting factor if you run a whatever center. It's a limiting factor.
Dorothea's system of waiting for one of her clients to adopt dogs who have been left at the gate has worked in the past. As she sees it, as long as he is not taken into the local shelter where he will get stuck for the rest of his life, he has a chance. Of course, I am feverishly calculating what it would take to get Enrico Fritz to Los Angeles. But given that we already have 2 dogs, a cat, 5 chickens, and several more days of filming in different parts of the country, I resolve to spread the word on social media to see if I can find someone to take him. Meanwhile, as we continue our interview, Enrico Fritz finds his way back into the compound and sneaks into the office. Dorothea figured out that what looked like a quote-unquote stray dog problem was actually a human problem, a never-ending flow of privately owned dogs who were unfixed and proliferating on the streets. She realized that in order to decrease the numbers going into the shelter, she needed to focus on local dog owners.
So we intensified our spay-neuter work, our preventive measurement work.
In the beginning, when Dorothea was trying to convince the local community to sterilize their dogs, she relied on word of mouth. The Americans at the nearby Navy base started coming in to spay and neuter their pets, and they started talking to their Italian friends and neighbors.
They started talking, and then the first Italians came, wanted to have the same procedure. And then they were talking, there was no internet, no Facebook, no what. And more people came to get their dogs fixed because it was convenient.
And you were offering it for free in some cases?
In the beginning, we nearly everything we did free. We didn't have anything to eat, but the dogs ate and were fixed. It went very well in the beginning, so even town councils, mayors, whatever, and the public veterinary services were really eager to learn and even use methods like this.
For the next few years, Dorothea made great strides in working alongside the authorities and spreading awareness of spay and neutering in her local community. And then along came the 1991 law banning euthanasia and offering shelters money based on the number of dogs they house, and everything changed.
It came out that town councils have to build shelters or make contracts with commercial shelters, and they have to pay, and the money came out and then suddenly stopped. There was walls like tuck, 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 and nobody worked anymore in the preventive measure. Only the Naples city continued, but all the others stopped. I mean, if you get €3 a day per dog in a shelter, that's 3 per 30, it's nearly €100 a month for one dog, and if you have 600 dogs, that's €60,000 a month. You know, it's €1 million business.
And that's provided by the
Town
national government?
Town councils have to pay for that's another problem, I think, why it's not working. Town councils have to pay for the recovering, and the veterinary services decide which dog has to go in a shelter. So that who is deciding to recover it doesn't have to pay for, and they want to get all the dogs in these shelters.
And then where does the town council get the money to pay the contract?
Taxes, that's the taxpayer paying for this. And if you go to, I mean, this is another thing. There's Castelvolturno, I think, is paying €300,000 a year for dogs in shelter without resolving the problem. You saw it yesterday, how many dogs. That's a big money for a small town like this, you know, and it's not resolving the problem. It's really not resolving the problem.
If you drive around Castelvolturno, it is clear to see that there are high rates of poverty in this area. It is shocking to think that €300,000 are being spent each year to lock up this community's unwanted dogs, without any progress being made on decreasing the numbers in the shelters.
In Castelvolturno, then, if there are old people that don't have money, they don't have the possibility to buy medicine for themselves. So they spend more money for stray dogs in a shelter, not resolving a problem, instead of helping the social weak people. That's not okay. In schools, they have sometimes, they have like, not always, they have like digital projectors. But if they don't have screens to close the windows, so they're in daylight, you know, and even if you project something on the wall, children don't see it. Or I saw things like the electricity, it's dangerous. I mean, the wires are coming out of the wall, something like this in schools. There's no money for this, and they have to spend this amount of money for stray dogs in a shelter, and they're suffering without resolving the problem in the street. That's, for my opinion, a social issue.
The warped financial incentive to house more dogs rather than less wasn't the only part of the 1991 law to throw a major spanner into the works. The ban on euthanasia, in theory a positive thing, also brought about chaos. Dorothea fought with the local authorities to try to ensure that the ban was implemented responsibly.
I was telling them that it will be a mess if you don't have a time of transition, because if you stop from one, I told them you have to see how many animals you killed every year, and if you stop this from one day to the other, you know exactly the number of animals you have to rehome or put in shelters in 1 year. So Naples City killed 5,000 dogs every year. 5,000 dogs. So they needed places for 5,000 dogs every year. Because if you take dogs away, they had every year 4,800, 5,200, but every year on average 5,000. You know?
So
that was the constant number for so many years since they had records.
So
you know from this that the taking away animals, killing animals from a territory is not reducing the total number, because every year another 5,000 animals were on the street and were killed in the beginning and then taken to shelters.
To many animal advocates, the no-kill law is a dream. But as Italy has shown, without proper planning, the dream quickly becomes a nightmare.
And they keep paralyzed dogs sometimes in shelters. I have seen horrible things, you know, horrible things. The no-kill law is only a good idea if you do alternative measurements together or before. Okay? So you have to start immediately with closing the spigot.
Closing the spigot sums up Dorothea's main strategy for tackling the high numbers of unwanted dogs in southern Italy.
There is too many births in comparison to homes available. That's it. Okay? So if you have a problem at tripping the water tap, it's tripping. So you have two possibilities. You clean underneath every day, or get a bucket underneath so when it's full you empty it somehow, or you call the plumber. So what would you do? I think every normal, logical thinking person would call the plumber, That's exactly the same. If you have a tripping spigot, in this case too many births of puppies and kittens, you never will finish the problem if you clean up underneath, because if the bucket is full you kill them. You rehome somebody, but it's not working.
In the years that followed, the only part of the 1991 law that was being upheld was the no-kill part, the part that filled all the shelters. Ironically, the other parts of the law, which would have done a lot to close off the spigot, namely spay-neutering and microchipping of owned dogs, were not being enforced.
What about fining people for infractions?
Yeah, that's even in the law. So, but the fees are different, but they don't control here.
Yeah.
Like it's. I say this all the time. When I cross the border to Germany and there's 80 kilometers an hour, I do 80 kilometers an hour. Honestly, in Italy, if there's 80 kilometers an hour, everybody is running me too. So because I know there is no control, there's no control.
As the 1991 law led only to an increase in the numbers of dogs suffering in shelters, Dorothea once again took matters into her own hands. If the law wasn't going to protect the dogs, she knew that education would. So she doubled down on her spay and neuter campaign and ratcheted up her education efforts in her local community.
On Saturday we have a weekly market, so every Saturday morning I had an information booth on this market, so I got up at 6 to be there, at 5 to be there at 6, because otherwise they would occupy my little space. And I was there with this little booth, having the poster about the law, about the microchipping, offering free spay and neutering, giving information.
Dorothea also started teaching workshops in the local schools, knowing that in Italy, children have a lot of power.
I go with the stock, see it's on a leash, that's Frida. That's my Frida, she's going with me to school all the time. And she has a microchip. I have a reader with me, the children are searching for the microchip. And I show them the microchip in a syringe, so they know exactly what is going on, So, and then there's a leash. And sometimes when I have to go outside, the dog is somewhere on the floor, and I said to the teacher, "Can you hold it a minute?" And then I go out, and the children are laughing. And then we say that's how important it is to confine your dog. That's what I tell the children. Do you like your dog? Yes. And can you imagine it's running away and nobody will give it back to you anymore because it's so? No, that's not possible. They have to identify it. Then if somebody finds it, they cannot keep it. So I explain. And then they go home and say, our dog needs to be identified. And then sometimes furious parents are calling here and saying, what did you say to my dog? And, oh, it's only the law. And that's, and then they come and get the dog's microchipped. And then we talk about sterilization and things.
As well as educating her community through the weekly market and the local schools, Dorothea managed to coordinate the first official census in the area, which involved knocking on doors with a policeman at her side.
We went with the town council, police in a little village in the province of Caserta, 3,300 inhabitants. We went really from house to house and checked on the microchip of the dogs, and if they didn't have any, we did it. It was, I think, only 20-something% of the private owned dogs were identified, and we did 800 and something microchips at the spot of the private dogs on the territory. Real strays turned out to be only 20. So in total 3,300 inhabitants, and we found 1,000 owned dogs. Nearly all are allowed to roam freely. So we offered spay and neutering free.
As Dorothea's reach expanded and more local dog owners were coming to her clinic for free spay and neutering, she started to get pushback from the local veterinary association. They accused her of stealing clients from them. So, ever the pragmatist, Dorothea once again pivoted and got creative.
So we had to be a little bit careful. So I invented the Adopt a Stray program.
Adopt a Stray?
Mm-hmm. And they adopt their own stray.
It took us a moment to realise what she was saying. Dorothea started advertising that if any of the local people found a stray dog and agreed to adopt it, she would give them free vet services. Not only did this allow her to bypass the accusations from the Vet Association that she was competing with them for the business of privately owned dogs, but more importantly, it strongly encouraged the local community to register their dogs and take responsibility for them.
We only do it free of charge if they put the microchip on their name on. You can educate through the money very well.
Dorothea's strategy of creating an incentive for local people to take responsibility for their dogs is in sharp contrast to the national law that provides an incentive for more and more dogs to be institutionalized without the hope of ever finding a home. As she sees it, if the private vets were doing their job in the first place, of educating their clients and upholding the law by making sure that their clients' dogs are microchipped, then they wouldn't be able to sign up for her free Adopt a Stray services.
I'm not going to question where and when he found the dog, because my interest is to get it fixed and microchipped. So if somebody shows up, even with a purebred whatever, saying they found it, I will put a microchip in without questioning and give it an appointment for spay and neutering.
Dorothea might not have succeeded in her original goal in 1982 of closing the local shelter, but her efforts over nearly 4 decades have certainly made a huge and lasting impact on her local community. Her clinic now services a large number of extremely loyal clients, many of whom we spoke to. Changes are continuing to happen in the local community, but it has taken a lot of patience.
If you paint a wall, you see it immediately. If you spay neuter to resolve a stray problem, you see it after 30 years. And you need a lot of patience.
Did you ever want to walk away?
Every week. But then I tell myself that's exactly what I want to. And that's not good.
And what kept you going then?
I'm angry with some of these people that they keep these dogs without thinking in the shelters. When I go to visit a shelter and I can't sleep for a week, it makes me very, very sad that they don't want to resolve the problem. So I keep going because I think each dog, cat, spayed, neutered is not contributing to this business.
Yeah.
Dorothea has made her mark on both local and national politics in terms of animal welfare in Italy, but it is clear that her biggest impact is here, in this rugged little town off the beaten track, far away from what most people think of when they think of Bella Italia. To date, Dorothea and her team have completed over 80,000 spay and neuter procedures, and she has fostered an army of animal advocates in her local community who are continuing to help her spread the word. This lady has been coming to Dorothea's clinic since the very beginning. She is clearly a huge fan and recently rescued this dog who was abandoned near her home. Eleonora is a local dog rescuer who tries to promote adoptions in the area and has a full house of rescue dogs herself. We met a young couple who had found 2 abandoned kittens they wanted to adopt, and they were signing up for Dorothea's Adopt a Stray program. This man told us that his daughter had introduced him to Dorothea's clinic, and he was clearly besotted with his wayward little dog, Layla. And the best story of all was that the day after we left, we heard that a local family had come forward to adopt Enrico Fritz, and they had signed him up for Dorothea's Adopt a Stray program. Dorothea is living proof that the most useful thing we can do when a situation is overwhelming is to focus on positively affecting the environment around us. After a long day at the clinic, Dorothea somehow found the energy to cook an amazing vegan curry for us. We met her rescue dogs and 2 volunteers from Germany who are staying with her. Dorothea is in constant need of help and she welcomes volunteers into her home from all over the world, but she only accepts serious applicants. Her message to anybody thinking of signing up to volunteer at her clinic comes directly from her own experience. Don't come looking for an easy life in the sun. Next, we are heading to Puglia to talk to Michele Menuno and find out more about the real stray dogs of the South. Please tune in to episode 3 to follow our journey.